how is Mokaverse helping to protect the ownership that 애니모카브랜즈 think the most important?
Yeah, so I think data is a really prime example of ownership. Most of the time when you're interacting with Google, Facebook, or 23andMe, all of your data is basically stored in a centralized database. And that centralized database is owned and managed. Anyone can basically, as 23andMe as a centralized entity, can erase, change your data, or even deny access to your own data. And how we're solving that problem is in the future, the user can re-own their data by basically tokenizing any kinds of web data they see on the screen. In a trustless way, that's one way to do it. Another way is from, for example, like SK or OneFootball perspective, they have their own first-party data. The user have the ability to issue that data on the blockchain, encrypt it, and only the user can decrypt it, right? So in the future, any kinds of applications that want to verify that user data, that company needs or have the option to pay the user in order to verify that data and access that data, right? So it's really giving the control back to the user because only the user has the right to give access to anyone to know about me. And that would be even very powerful back to the AI topic as well, right? I want to give my data to that AI agent to execute on behalf of me. And by doing that, I have the key and only I have the key to give that access.
So Mokaverse have signed a business with SK Planet. So like, what are the main points of the agreement and what do you expect? Like what effects do you expect in Korean market or maybe in Asian market?
SK Planet partnership is very, very exciting. The reason being the team and I, with the executive team at SK Planet, they're relatively very Web3 native and they really understand the ethos and the principles of blockchain. And working with a team like that, you can do a lot of amazing things, a lot of experiments. So what we expect from this partnership, and we have a common mission, is how do we onboard as many users as possible in the most seamless way, giving the user ownership of their data and maximizing rewards and access for their users. And this is really the first step, but then the second step of that is how can we even build a bigger network with SK Planet being as a core part of this seeding the user base and then tapping into a lot of the brands, retail stores and merchants and other projects in Korea or whoever are basically interested in Korean market.
Okay, then how do you guys see the Korean market? What's your evaluation of Korean Web3 environments?
I mean, first of all, I think Korea is a very exciting Web3 market. It's, in terms of, I think, per capita trading of crypto, maybe the highest in the world, by a lot of retail. It's also because you have a pretty beneficial tax structure that makes it possible to do that as well. So, we have to thank the government for that. So thank you, Korean government. But I would say the one flavor that Korea is very different, which is both the opportunity and somewhat the challenge, is that you don't have a very strong on-chain culture. Right? So most of the trading, actually all of the trading is in centralized exchanges. And so what happens is that means that while Korea is it's interesting, even when it comes to mobile technology and when it comes to the experiences on social and even gaming, Korea is always a bit different, right? It's like it has their, it's not Google, it's Naver, right? It's not it has very different flavors as its own market, and I think this is one of those examples of the flavor. But I would say that it does mean that Korea does miss out on essentially the on-chain opportunities, right? So if you are mostly on an exchange and you're trading, that's fine. But that means you can participate in maybe the yield that's generated on-chain, or participate in a certain type of airdrop mechanisms, which is what Mokaverse is doing. So I think the opportunity for Mokaverse is, can we create together with SK and partners a framework where we can help bring Korea more into an on-chain culture? Because the on-chain culture is really how you get connected to a global opportunity. It's great that you can trade your crypto in an exchange. The asset is global, but the relationship with the customer is not global. But if you want to do business in the future and you want to tap into the global market from Korea, let's call it customers in, Japan or customers in America or customers in Europe, for instance, then having your assets on an exchange in Korea does not help you. right? Because it can only be used by Koreans for Koreans. But if it's on-chain, the whole world opens to you. So that's the opportunity. And I think we're hoping that with Mokaverse, we can sort of get more people in Korea to go on-chain, because the Moka ID is an on-chain strategy, and they see the benefits, and it also helps them open up to global opportunities, which I think, especially in this era, becomes even more important.
How do you think?
Well, Korea has very strong IP culture and history, and that definitely play a key role in terms of user onboarding. The thing is, I think in the previous cycle, is the bottleneck and the friction has always been the user experience, which I think in the past 2 years, we have the industry as a whole has a major breakthrough on smart account, abstracting everything away from the user. So maximizing that conversion from centralized exchange users to on-chain, and having that experience embedded within the consumer app with millions of users, and making that onboarding experience like very easy, with the strong IP and brand and that active culture, we do believe there is a massive distribution there. I know a lot of projects are going to Korea for trading volume and all that, and the crypto adoption is amazing, but then how we're looking at Korea is truly about user onboarding.
So, how do you guys think that the recent industrial trends in China and Hong Kong, like about this Web3 industry?
So broadly, very positive. I think we shouldn't expect that China is going to suddenly open up crypto trading. Okay, that's not going to happen. But that's true for equities, other types of assets that you can't trade in China, but you can do it through Hong Kong. So Hong Kong has always been the financial intermediary for China, and that would be no different for crypto and blockchain-related assets. So when you take a look, for instance, even in sort of Xi Jinping's address, he talks about blockchain and he talks about Web3. He just doesn't talk about crypto. But whereas in Hong Kong, we have lots of policies that are basically here to support exchanges and the ability to trade crypto. I think a few more exchanges have been approved in Hong Kong now as well. So, it brings the number up. And we ourselves, for instance, at Animoca have a joint venture with Standard Chartered, which is, a big local bank, and Hong Kong Telecom, to basically launch a stablecoin that is essentially licensed by essentially the Hong Kong Central Bank, which is the HKMA. So that's quite forward, I would say. I think in Asia, that would make it, and maybe globally, the only central bank licensed stablecoin. So again, Hong Kong is a part of China, right? Hong Kong probably doesn't do these things without certain kind of permission, right? So I would say the relationship there is very pro crypto, and also in this age of let's call it economic uncertainty and tariffs and everything else related to that, the need to essentially have alternatives like this becomes even greater. There is a broad thematic around de-dollarization, and I think this is something what blockchain is very relevant to. And also, it's an element of creating less dependency around the US. So, whether this is stablecoin or other forms of, crypto-related assets.
So it is like there are quite clear regulation about crypto in Hong Kong, but in Korea there is no clear regulation yet. So were there any difficulties when you worked with SK or worked with Korea?
Yeah, so we definitely respect the Korean regulation, and obviously we're very cautious in Korea as well. So we actually work very closely with the SK Planet compliance team. A lot of the things that we go through or pushing out, we actually go through pretty rigid process of compliance approval or green light. And so I think most and all of the partners that we work with in Korea actually respect and very careful about the Korea regulations. Everyone also anticipate more clarity that will be brought to the space as well.
I think we also need to distinguish between sort of when there is no regulation or no clarity, then, and this is not just a Korean thing, this is a global thing, then basically projects use frameworks of existing law and interpret it. Like, okay, we know this is a security, so we shouldn't do that. Or we know this could be an asset, so it's kind of like this, right? And so you see this happen all over the world. This is not just in Korea. And so when we talk about compliance, we're talking about compliance in the context of what we know, based on other type of assets that the legal teams say, this is okay, this is not okay, and we kind of straddle along lines. Of course, it would be great if there was clear regulation to say this is okay and that's not okay, but very often governments don't know themselves what it is, right? And so it's up to the industry to kind of self-regulate and sort of lead the way forward. And in some ways, you can see what's happening in America. America definitely swung all the way positive, right? But what we can now see, even though there's no regulation, like there's talk, right? But there is no actual regulation yet. The stablecoin bill is not out yet. The SEC hasn't put out any rulings. They say they're exploring, right? But there's messaging. And so the whole industry is already operating in America on the basis of what they are messaging without actually seeing the law. And this, to me, is the nature of innovation in business. Like, do we... I think Korea, sort of its real growth that happened, after the Asia economic crisis. I remember one of the sort of big things that Korea did was, the country was in trouble. People had no jobs, right? People needed food, and Korea built broadband, right? And so all the world was like, you can't feed on fiber and cable, right? But you built an infrastructure that created essentially a technology base that basically gave rise to sort of, I guess, South Korea's basically culture power, right? K-pop and sort of games and everything. It was only possible because your government did this. But did they create regulation to say, okay, if you're using the internet, here are the 100 rules? They didn't do that, right? They basically said, here's the internet, here's the broadband. We hope you do the right thing. Let's see what happens. The regulations came after, when they saw what people were doing, that they needed correcting, and this happened all over the world. But if you over-regulate, you stifle innovation. I think Korea understands as well. You just have to look at Europe, and you can kind of get the contrast where there is no innovation, precisely because they over-regulate first, on the framework of technology. Right? So I think we understand this in this region. Hong Kong is like that, to some extent Singapore, Southeast Asia, right? They obviously want to be careful, but they also don't want to stifle innovation.
Okay, so this could be our last question. So what are the Animokabrands and Mokaverse's top priority of next year? Like, do you guys have any upcoming project, or do you guys have any goal for next year? Maybe this year?
Well, this year for sure. I think in Web3 we cannot really see beyond 3 months. So, jokes aside, I think the most important priority for us is to build a best-in-class digital identity infrastructure, going to market, start onboarding a lot of users, integrating, making the developer experience very easy for our partners to come on board, building great case study business cases for business to actually be successful. We already see a lot of traction, especially today. We have received some really good news on the partner onboarding side. So there's definitely something there, and we're pretty sure there's the product market fit is there. We're super excited on onboarding hundreds of millions of users. That would be the highest priority.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just to echo Kenneth's point, Mokaverse is a super high priority for us. And I guess just, in the earlier part of the interview, why is it important? Is because we need a trust network that you can rely on. One of the biggest problems we have in Web3 is, do I trust you when I don't know who you are, right? And we don't have a good way of doing this in Web3. And again, Mokaverse aims to solve that with the kind of partners that we can onboard people from Web2 into Web3. Right? But in terms of thematics that we continue to be focused on, obviously outside of Mokaverse, we continue to make investments in the space. It's all centered around how do we bring more people in and create more utility in the Web3 space. So student finance for education is a really big one, right? I really want to see. And Mokaverse is a great example of that. I really want to see much more use cases that we can be proud of in Web3. Okay, so trading meme coins, I don't think we can be proud of that. It can be fun, and we can have, it's interesting. We can enjoy it, but you're not going to impress your mother or your father or your grandparents to say, you should join crypto because of meme coins, right? It just doesn't work, right? So you have to solve things that solve real problems. And so I would say broadly, thematically, that's what we're doing, right? That's what we want to. That's what we're trying to invest to, right? And so, what is that? Digital identity, education, financial literacy, and all these type of areas. And of course, the areas of growth. We think, for instance, later this year, Web3 gaming will make a very big comeback, right? And we think that's also because the industry will do better, and there's more need for basically a blockchain technology and also decentralized AI. But I would go back to basic saying we love the great use cases, and I hope, and that's what we're trying to build towards, is that we will then have shining examples, which is why Mokaverse is so important. Or if someone was to say, well, what is the best use case, or some of the great use cases that you can talk about Web3 that you're sort of proud of, that's what we want to help achieve, right? Have fun trading and do all that kind of stuff, but don't forget why you're here. Yeah.
Thank you for today's interview.
Thank you.
So yeah, we're quite done over here. So do you guys want to say goodbye in Korean to Korean? See you again.
Okay. So 또 만나요.
네, 또 만나요.
또 만나요.
또 만나요.